Okay, as Hashem, we're going to begin now Maseches Berachos Mem Tes Amud Aleph 49a in Amud Yomi. We're going to start the bottom of Mem Ches Amud Beis 48b at the bottom of the page, third to last line on the page. Tanya Rabbi Eliezer Omer. You see Mem Ches Amud Beis, third to last line on the page. We're going to have three sections in today's learning. The first section we're going to discuss particular phrases and sentences that need to be inserted in Birkas Hamazon, or maybe could be left out, etc. But there will be particular phrases that need to be said. The second section we'll deal with is going to be a discussion about, particularly within Birkas Hamazon, but in general, the idea of finishing off a bracha only with one theme, not multiple themes. And in the third section we'll have two final discussions regarding this idea of special insertions within Birkas Hamazon. You see, it's the two dots. Yeah, Tanya. So the Gemara begins as follows. Tanya Rabbi Eliezer Omer. Rabbi Eliezer teaches the following. Now we're going to talk about particular sentences and words that we say within Birkas Hamazon. So Rabbi Eliezer teaches, Kol shelo Omar Eretz Chemda Tova Urechava beBirkas Hamazon. Anyone that doesn't say this sentence, Eretz Chemda Tova Urechava beBirkas Haaretz, anyone that doesn't say the land that is Chemda, desirable, good, Rechava, expansive, in Birkas Haaretz, which is the second bracha of Birkas Hamazon. So if he doesn't say that sentence in the second bracha, Umalchos Beis David Beboni Yerushalayim, or if he doesn't say a reference to the kingship of Beis David in the third bracha of Bonei Yerushalayim, Lo Yotzi Yedei Chavaso, says Rabbi Eliezer, he has not fulfilled his obligation of Birkas Hamazon. Those are integral sentences to say. Nachum Hazaken Omer, Nachum Hazaken added, Tzarich Sheyizkor Ba Bris, in Birkas Haaretz, in the second bracha, in Bonei Yerushalayim. He needs to mention bris, in Birkas Haaretz, in Nodalacha. You have to also mention bris milah. And Rabbi Yossi Omer tzarich sheyizkor b'Torah. Rabbi Yossi says you also have to mention the Torah. So Rashi explains the reason you need to mention bris milah and the Torah is that these are two things that because of them we inherited Eretz Yisrael. So therefore, Birkas Haaretz, in that bracha, it's appropriate that we also mention in those the idea of Milah as well as Torah. Rashi says, if you can take a look at Rashi, it says, Tzarich sheyizkor ba bris beBirkas Haaretz, in the bracha of the land, she'al yedei bris nitna leAvram, because through the treaty the land was promised, through the bris milah the land was promised to Avram that it would go to him and his descendants. And similarly about mentioning the Torah, Rashi continues, Tzarich sheyizkor ba Torah she'af b'schus haTorah va'mitzvos yarshu es haaretz, because also in the merit of the Torah and mitzvos the Jewish people would eventually conquer Eretz Yisrael. So these both need to be mentioned in the second bracha of Birchas Haaretz, because these are necessary tools for us to ultimately inherit Eretz Yisrael. Now, what about the order? It means we need to mention both Bris Milah and also the Torah, but what's the first one we should place? So Plima Omer Tzarich Sheyakdim Bris LaTorah. A person first needs to put Bris Milah before Torah. It means when he mentions the phrase Al Brischa Shechasamta B'Vsareinu Val Torascha Shalim Aratanu, which is actually the custom, first you mention the Bris Milah and then you mention Torah. Now why does Plimo say that? Shazu Nitna B'Shalosh Brisos, because Bris Milah, the Torah was given with three covenants, which Rashi explains. The three covenants was the three times that Bris Milah, that the Torah was given to the Jewish people. It's actually a machlokas what the three times are. It was given by Har Sinai. It was again given by either the Oel Moed and Har Gerizim, and then the third time was by Arvos Moav. But it was given three times. So the Torah was given three different occasions, which is referred to as three treaties. Turning to Mem Tes Amud Aleph, Vizu, as opposed to Milah, Nitna Biyod Gimel Brisos, was given with 13 covenants, meaning that the Torah, the Bris Milah, Rashi learns, is it mentions the word Bris 13 times in the Parshios of Bris Milah. So therefore, Milah in a certain sense is more significant, and therefore it should be mentioned before the Al Torascha Shalim Aratanu, which is L'maisar custom, Al Brischa Shechasamta B'Vsareinu, and then we say the Al Torascha Shalim Aratanu afterwards. And again, these are both meant to be put in Birkas Haaretz because through these we inherited Eretz Yisrael. Okay, continues the Gemara now on this same theme of insertions. Rabbi Abba Omer Tzarich Sheyomer Ba Hoda'at Techila V'Sof. in Berachos Haaretz, we have to start off with Hoda and finish off with Hoda. And Rashi explains, we do this in saying, Noda L'cha Hashem Elokeinu in the beginning, and we finish off, we say, he says, Anu modim lach, but Anachnu modim lach. So we mention thanks or acknowledgement in the beginning and the end in the bracha of Eretz Yisrael, thanking Hashem for the land. But the Gemara says, Rabbi Abba continues, V'hapoiches, if a person wants to diminish the amount of times that he says these thanks, lo yipchos me'echad, he shouldn't have less than one time. And if he has even less than one, that would be considered disgraceful, that's inappropriate. Now, regarding the conclusion of these brachos, now, if a person finishes off Berachos Haaretz, instead of ala aretz ve'ala mazon like we do, but instead he finishes off manchil aratzos, right? Thank you Hashem, blessed are you Hashem, who inherits lands or bequeaths lands to people. Now that's a very general thing to say. Whereas ala aretz ve'ala mazon, what we're actually saying is, for Eretz Yisrael we're acknowledging HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Or Moshiach es Yisrael, if somebody finishes off Moshiach es Yisrael, you're the one who saved the Jewish people, Bebonei Yerushalayim, in the bracha Bonei Yerushalayim, instead of finishing off like we do, Bonei Beracham of Yerushalayim, which is a more particular, focused bracha, that we thank Hashem that He will be the one who's Bonei Yerushalayim, rebuilds Yerushalayim and gives it to us. Instead he finishes off Moshiach Yisrael, you're the one who generally saves Yisrael. Harei Zabur, he's considered a bore. A bore is like an empty or a foolish person. The reason is because it's finishing off in a general sense, whereas you're not focusing on the particular shevach or the particular thanks to HaKadosh Baruch Hu that we really should say. And continues Rabbi Abba, V'chol she'ena omer bris v'torah beBerachos Haaretz, anybody that doesn't say, again, these details of mentioning Milah and Torah in Berachos Haaretz, u'malchus beis David bebonei Yerushalayim, nor does he mention the kingship of David in the third bracha of Bonei Yerushalayim, lo yatzei yedei chovaso, he hasn't fulfilled his obligation of Birkas Hamazon. The Gemara says, Misayeh Leila Rabbi Law. This would be a support to the position of Rabbi Law. Amar Rabbi Law, Amar Rabbi Yaakov, Baracha, Mishum Rabbeinu, Kol Shelo Amar Baris V'Torah B'Birkas Haaretz. Anybody that doesn't mention Milah and also Torah in Birkas Haaretz, the second bracha of benching, Umalchus beis David bebonei Yerushalayim, and he doesn't mention the kingship of David in Bonei Yerushalayim, Lo yatzei yedei chovaso, he has not fulfilled his obligation. Okay, now on this note of how we finish off the brachos, the Gemara now tells us there's actually a machlokes. Pligi ba Abba Yosi ben Dustai v'Rabbanan. Excuse me, I skipped a step. Before we get there, we have now a machlokes which we touched on before. We touched on this machlokes before. We know for sure, everyone agrees, the first three brachos of Birkas Hamazon are d'oraisa. We learned that, we already mentioned that, it's from the Psukim. That's not debated. But what is debated is the fourth bracha of Atov V'Ametiv. So we actually had shittas already. Is Atov V'Ametiv the fourth bracha mid'oraisa or is midrabanan? So that's actually a debate here as well. Pligi ba'Abba Yosi ben Dustai v'Rabbanan. There is a machlokes regarding Atov V'Ametiv between Abba Yosi ben Dustai and the Rabbanan. Chad amar Atov V'Ametiv tzricha malchus. Now one of the shittas says Atov V'Ametiv requires malchus. Now what do you mean it requires malchus? It means you have to mention that Hashem is Elokeinu melech haolam, the king of the world, which, by the way, is how we paskin. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, hakel avinu malkeinu adreinu boreinu. We do mention malchus, actually, that is our psak, and we'll see in a minute why that is, but one of the shittas says you have to mention malchus in addition to Hashem. The Chadamar in the other shita says, Eina tzricha malchus, now you only say Baruch atah Hashem. You don't say Elokeinu melech haolam. You don't have to mention that. So the Gemara explains, based on that machlokes, in terms of if it's d'oraisa or d'Rabbanan, that is the reality of this debate as well. Manda amar tzricha malchus, the one who says you need to mention Hashem's name of malchus, that is, he's the king, Elokeinu melech haolam, kasavar d'Rabbanan. So he holds that the fourth bracha of benching is midrabbanan. Now let's speak that out. Therefore, since it's not connected to the beginning parts of benching, you can't utilize the same svaras of the others that don't require malchus, which are smucha lechaverta, as opposed to noda lecha and rachem. They're smucha lechaverta. They're considered connected to the earlier part where you started off Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam by Hazanas Hakol, the beginning. You could rely on those because those are smucha lechaverta. They're all dairaisa. But regarding the fourth bracha, if you hold it's derabanan, that's not smucha lechaverta. It's a new topic. Memela, you'd have to say malchus for it to be considered a significant bracha because it is derabanan. Uman damar eina tzricha malchus, and the other shita says you don't need malchus kasavar dairaisa. He holds it's dairaisa, and since it's dairaisa, it is smucha lechaverta. Since it's smucha lechaverta, you don't have to say malchus in there because it's already connected to prior brachas that include malchus, and therefore this can rely on that. So Rashi points out a very important point, though. If indeed it's considered smucha lechaverta, so then why do we even start off Baruch Atah Hashem? Meaning, in general, the way the other brachas are, you don't start off Baruch Atah Hashem. How do you do it? You start off without Baruch Atah Hashem, and you finish Baruch Atah Hashem. Noida Lecha finishes Ala Aretz Ve'Ala Mazayin. Rachim Na finishes off Boinei Yerushalayim. So if indeed you hold its Dairais and it's Smucha Lechaverta, you shouldn't start off Baruch Atah Hashem.
So he would say you don't?
Huh?
No,
that's not what we just said. We just said if you hold its Dairais, you don't need to say Malchus, but you do start off Baruch Atah Hashem, L'kulei Alma. So why do you start off Baruch Atah Hashem?
That's the formula for
the kasha is why. So Rashi says, if you look at the Rashi, Malchus Kasavar Dairais, Manda Omer Einatzricha Malchus Kasavar Dairais, in the middle of that Rashi, he says, Umiu Paiseach Ba Bebaruch. Nonetheless, we still start off Baruch Atah Hashem, Lefi Shepsicha Hi HaChasimasa, because really its start is its finale. Meaning what? In regards to this bracha, this is considered a bracha kitzar, the way Tosfos speaks it out. It's a short bracha, or another way to say that is, it's not a compound bracha with different elements associated. Rather, it's one bracha, the entirety of it. And therefore, when you start off Baruch Atah Hashem, that is the bracha. So you don't have any other themes involved. So Baruch Atah Hashem is essentially, as we finish off the other brachas, this is like the finale of that bracha, because this is a bracha kitzara. But if you hold it deraisa, you don't say Melech HaOlam, though. That's the point. We'll tie back into this machlokis momentarily in the sugya, but that is a machlokis. L'maisa we pass, we do say Elokeinu Melech HaOlam, right. And we'll see later. Actually, we even mention it more times. We'll get to that later at the end of the sugya today. Let's continue now. Let's move on to the next topic. So Tana Rabbanan, Ma'u Chaysim. So the Gemara says now on this topic of finishing off the third bracha, which we know talks about rebuilding Yerushalayim, we said was established by David and Shlomo. So regarding that, Mahu Chaysim, what is the appropriate way to finish that bracha? So Tanakama says, B'ben Yerushalayim, with the rebuilding of Yerushalayim. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, Omer, Moshiach Yisrael. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda says, no, we finish off Moshiach Yisrael. So the Gemara says, Moshiach Yisrael in Binyan Yerushalayim Loi, means we just said, L'chayra, Binyan Yerushalayim is the more accurate descriptor in terms of finishing off. And actually we said you're a bore if you finish off with Moshiach Yisrael, that Hashem is the one who saved the Jewish people. So what's the Pshan Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda? Ela Ema af Moshiach Yisrael. The way Rashi explains it is, L'chatchila you should finish off B'nai Yerushalayim. B'diavad, if you finished off Moshiach Yisrael, it's a similar topic, and that would also be effective for the third bracha. Now the Gemara tells us a story. Rabbi Bar Rav Huna iklu lebei Reish Galusa. Rabbi Bar Rav Huna went to the house of the Reish Galusa. The Reish Galusa is the head of the Jews of diaspora in Bovel, and he went to the house of the Reish Galusa. So they gave him to bench. So pasach bechada v'sayim betarti. When he started off Rachem, he started off with one. Now one means, there's two topics we're going to discuss here. Al Yisrael Amecha, V'al Yerushalayim Yirecha. The focus being on Yisrael, your nation, or Yerushalayim, your city. L'maisa, we have both, Yersois, we say both. But he started off with one, means he started off mentioning either Yerushalayim or Yisrael, not both. V'sayim betarti. But when he finished off both. Means he finished off Moshiach Yisrael u'boinei Yerushalayim. So he finished off the bracha with both elements in the bracha at the end. So Amar of Chizda.
Moshiach or Amecha?
Moshiach Yisrael Amecha. Yeah, Moshiach, yeah. It's the same thing. Moshiach Yisrael, yeah. Moshiach Yisrael u'boinei Yerushalayim. He said both. So he started off with one and he finished off with both. Moshiach Yisrael and Boinei Yerushalayim. So Amar of Chizda said, Gevorta lemichtam betarti? Is it a great thing to finish off with two themes? V'hatanya, but we learned in a brisa, and we've mentioned this before. Rebbe says, Ein chaismin b'shtayim. You're not meant to finish a bracha with two themes. When you finish a bracha, Baruch Atah Hashem, it should be one theme. Rashi explains what's the issue. Why is it inappropriate to finish off with two themes. So he says it's similar, and we'll mention this later too, to the issue of making mitzvahs chavilas. You're not meant to do two mitzvahs at once because it shows that you're just trying to get them over with. So similarly with brachas, it's more to be specific on one theme, not to bundle them together. So therefore, if Chizda said to this Rabbi Bar of Huna, is it a great thing that you're doing and saying Mashé Yisrael L'Bnei Yerushalayim? That's actually wrong. Rebbe says, Ein chais min b'shtayim. You're not meant to finish off with two themes, and therefore that's inappropriate. Now that we introduced this, the Gemara is tangentially going to discuss this idea. We're not meant to finish a bracha with two themes. The Gemara is going to go through a series of 5 questions showing, actually we do seem to have brachas that have two themes when we finish off. We're going to have to figure out how indeed are they considered one theme, even though they appear to be two ideas. So Gufa, the Gemara says Gufa, Rebbe Omer ein chais min b'shtayim. We're not supposed to finish off a bracha with two different themes, two distinct themes. Eisevei Levi l'Rebbe. So Levi turned to Rebbe and he asked him a kasha. We know that we finish off in Berachos Hamazon, the second bracha, ala aretz ve'ala mazayin. We thank Hashem for the land and the produce that comes from it, the mazon, the sustenance that comes from it. L'chayr, that's finishing off with two themes.
The land that gives you sustenance.
Oh, okay, good. So Rebbe said back, no, eretz demafka mazon. It sounds like two themes, but it's really one and the same. It's the land that gives us sustenance, so it's considered one theme. Similarly, question 2, ala aretz v'ala peres. If we eat grapes, we finish off with an ala eitz, and we finish off ala aretz v'ala peres. So it's two themes. Rebbe said back, no, eretz demafka peres. Again, that means you're thanking Hashem for the land that produces fruits. So that's one theme. Question 3, Mekadesh Yisrael v'azmanim. We know on Yontif we'll say HaKadosh Baruch Hu sanctifies the Jews and the Zmanim. So l'chayr, that's two different themes, sanctifying the Jews as well as the Zmanim, the designated times. So the Gemara says that's not a kasha either. Yisrael dekadshinu l'Zmanim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu sanctifies the Jews and the Jews sanctify the Zmanim. It's the koyach of Bezdin. The power of the courts is to determine the special designated times of the year. So therefore that's one and the same. Says the Gemara, what about Levi? Turn back to Rebbe. Mekadesh Yisrael v'Rosh Chodashim. Rosh Chodesh we say HaKadosh Baruch Hu sanctifies the Jewish people on Rosh Chodesh. Again, Yisrael dekadshinu l'Rosh Chodashim. Hashem sanctified the Jews, and the Jews in turn sanctify Rosh Chodesh.
Why is that a question? I just said that his manim is.
Okay, so here the Gemara is going through the steps, but this is the kasha I guess we're leading to really. The 5th question. This one is taka kasha. What about Mekadesh HaShabbos v'Yisrael v'Azmanim? If it's Shabbos and Yontif, so what do we say in the Tefillah? We say HaKadosh Baruch Hu sanctifies Shabbos and the Jewish people and Zmanim. Now, hold on. You can't say that the Yidden are Mekadesh Shabbos now, right? Because what Yidden aren't Mekadesh Shabbos. HaKadosh Baruch Hu sanctified Shabbos from Ma'aseh Berachos. We could sanctify Yomim Tovim, but Shabbos is always Shabbos. Right. So now you can't say it's Hashem who sanctifies Yisrael, who sanctifies Shabbos. So this taka seems like two themes, and yet we finish off the bracha that way when it's Shabbos Yontif. So the Gemara says, Rebbe said, okay, chutz mizu. You're right, taka it's a kasha. This is the exception. There's two themes and you finish off the bracha that way. So then Levi turns to Rebbe and says, Umay shna. So what's the difference? Why is it that you're saying this is an okay way to finish off a bracha, whereas as Bnei Yerushalayim, you shouldn't finish off Moshiach Yisrael and Bnei Yerushalayim? What's the difference?
You have no choice.
Well, why no choice?
You have to mention Shabbos.
Okay, but if there's a Seder, then do it the right way. So they should have established the bracha properly.
What would the Seder be?
Okay, here. So the Gemara says, now this is also not two themes. There's a difference. Why? Because he really regarding this Shabbos and Yontif, it's really one theme. Why? Because as Rashi explains, it's all a matter of kedusha, of sanctification. If you want to take a look at Rashi, Rashi says, Chutz mizu ma'ishna ein kan ela bracha mekadesh. It's a bracha about sanctification. Shemivarich la'akadosh baruch hu, shemekadesh hashabbos ve'azmanim. We're blessing Hashem that He sanctified Shabbos and the Zmanim, as well as the Jewish people. So it is considered one theme in a certain way, and that's why it's appropriate to finish off that bracha that way, back in the Gemara. But Hasam Tarti, whereas if you finish off Bnei Yerushalayim, Moshiach Yisrael Bnei Yerushalayim, that's considered two themes. Kol chada v'chada b'apei nafsha, each one stands alone, and that's why it's not appropriate to finish off the third bracha that way, but we could finish off Mekadesh Shabbos v'Yisrael v'Azmanim, as it's all the theme of Kedusha. Fine. So the Gemara says, fine, but what's the pshat bichlal? We didn't clarify yet. Why is it we're not allowed to finish off a bracha with two different themes? What's the pshat? I already told you from Rashi. But the Gemara says, v'taimamai ein chaismin b'shtayim. What's the reason that we're not supposed to finish off a bracha with two themes? So the Gemara says, l'fi she'eino osim mitzvahs chavilas chavilas. Because we're not supposed to make mitzvahs in bundles. So to group two brachas together is akin to that issue. We're not meant to do that, and therefore we don't. Fine. So Lemaisa, the Gemara says, "My have Allah." What's the psak? What's the psak Lemaisa in terms of how do you finish off these brachas in Birkas Hamazon? My have Allah. So the Gemara says like this: Amr of Sheshes. Sheshes says like this: Pasach berachim al amcha Yisrael. It depends how you start. If you start off the bracha of Bnei Yerushalayim, you start off the third bracha with rachim al amcha Yisrael, with the Yisrael being the theme. So chaysim Moshe Yisrael. Finish off the same. Baruch atah Hashem, Moshe Yisrael. The end should reflect the beginning. Or Pasach berachim al Yerushalayim. If you started off rachim al Yerushalayim, so chaysim b'Bnei Yerushalayim, then you should finish off Bnei Yerushalayim as well. Rav Sheshes says it would make sense that the end bracha should reflect the way you started off rachim. That's Rav Sheshes. Rav Nachman disagrees. Rav Nachman says, Vilu Pasach berachim al Yisrael. Even if you started off with Rachim al Yisrael, Chaysim b'Bnei Yerushalayim. You should still finish off Bnei Yerushalayim. L'maisa we finish off Bnei Yerushalayim. And he says why? Mishum shene'emar, because the pasuk tells us in Tehillim, Bnei Yerushalayim Hashem will rebuild Yerushalayim. Nidchei Yisrael Yekanes, and he will gather in the scattered Jews. Eimasai Bnei Yerushalayim Hashem. When will Hashem rebuild Yerushalayim? Bisman shenidchei Yisrael Yekanes, when the Jews will be gathered in. So Mamela, even if you start off talking about the ingathering of the Jews, Moshe Yisrael, you could finish off Bnei Yerushalayim because these themes are inherently contingent on each other. Fine. Let's move on to the final section of the day today. Now, two final halachas really in terms of these insertions and halachas about Birkas Hamazon. So let's see. Amar le Rabbi Zera le Rav Chizda. The story goes as follows. Rabbi Zera turned to Rav Chizda, and Rav Chizda was apparently the Rebbe. He was the Rav. So Rabbi Zera, seemed to be was lower, he turned to Rav Chizda and he said, Nesi mar v'nisni, come teach us something. Rav Zera said to Rav Chizda, come teach us something. So Rav Chizda seemed to be down. And Rav Chizda turned to Rabbi Zera, Amar le, Birkas mizayna le gamirna. I haven't even learned properly about saying Birkas Hamazon. The Tenuya masnise and masnine, and you want me to teach you something? Meaning, I've failed in understanding Birkas Hamazon properly. I can't teach you halachas. I can't teach you things. So Amar le mai hais. Rabbi Zera said to Rav Chizda, what are you talking about? In what way do you not know Birkas Hamazon? What are you referring to? So Amar Leiser Rav Chizda said, "De'ekloi lebei Reish Galusa." I went to the Reish Galusa's house. Ubrichi Birkas Mezayna, and I led Birkas Hamazon. V'zakvi Rav Sheshes lekue alai kechivya, and Rav Sheshes straightened up his neck against me like a snake, or towards me like a snake. Means Rav Sheshes looked at me when I led Birkas Hamazon with anger, in a negative way. Rav Sheshes had some issue, Rav Chizda said, with what I did. The Gemara says, V'amai. So Rav Zera now was curious. What was it that Rav Chizda did to invoke the anger of Rav Sheshes? The Gemara says, the loy amri. So Rav Chizda said, I didn't say loy bris. I didn't mention bris milah, v'loy Torah, nor did I mention Torah, which are both meant to be said in the second bracha, as we've mentioned. V'loy malchus. I also didn't mention malchus beis David, which is meant to be said in the third bracha. So the Gemara says, V'amai loy amrit. So Rabbi Zera said to Rav Chizda, why didn't you say those? L'chayra, you're supposed to. Why didn't you say those things? So Rav Chizda said, I have a shita to rely on who says you don't say those insertions. Kid Rav Chananel Amarav. As Rav Chananel Amarav says, Rav Chananel Amarav, Loi Amar Bris v'Torah u'Malchus. If you don't mention in Birkas Hamazon Bris and Torah, you don't mention the Bris Milah, you don't mention Torah in the second bracha, or Malchus beis David in the third bracha, Yotza, you're still Yaitz at Birkas Hamazon. Now why is that? Because Bris, if you don't mention bris, you're yaitze, lefi she'ena b'nashim, because bris is not applicable to women. Women don't have bris milah. And Torah u'malchus, Torah and malchus are not nogeya. You don't have to mention lefi she'enan loy b'nashim v'loy ba'avadim, because they're not applicable. Torah don't have to. Women don't, and avadim don't have to learn Torah, and avadim and women can't become malachim, they can't become kings. Memela, if you leave those out, you're yaitze. Now, what's the svara in that? Let me just explain that for a second. The svara in that is that Chazal established a particular nusach when it comes to Birkas Hamazon. Logically, there should be one standardized nusach. So Rav Chizda said, I understand Rav's shita. I'm trying to be mitzvah people over here. If what I'm going to say is not going to cover everyone in the room and will exclude certain people, I'd rather say a more general layout and cover everyone, including the slaves and the women, and therefore I left out these 3 items that wouldn't apply to them. That's what Rav Chizda said was my svara. However, Rav Sheshes clearly didn't appreciate that, and Rabbi Zera now turned to Rav Chizda and he said, I don't understand. V'at shavket kol hani tanoi. You left all these tanoim, all these shitas we said until now that you're not yoytze and you have to say them. V'amaroi and the amaroi. V'avarata karav. Yeah, there is a shita like Rav, but why would you follow Rav against all the shitas we've said? You need to say these insertions, otherwise you're not yoytze. It's a good svara, but that's not the psak l'maisa, and we know we actually have those insertions, certainly in Birkas Hamazon. Let's finish off with the last section now. So, Amar Rabba Bar Bachana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabba Bar Bachana said a psak in the name of his Rebbe Rabbi Yochanan. The 4th bracha requires malchus. Now, the Gemara is about to challenge is that Rabbi Yochanan himself, we've learned earlier in the Masechta, says it's not considered a bracha unless you say melech ha'olam. We had other shittas who don't necessarily hold that way. But unless you say melech ha'olam, it's not considered a bracha. So the Gemara is going to say, what's your chiddush? Of course you have to say malchus, otherwise the 4th bracha is not considered a bracha. Now, the Gemara could have answered, the answer is to emphasize that it's D'Rabbanan like we mentioned above, but the Mefarshim speak out. Rabbi Yochanan's an Amoira. For Rabbi Yochanan to say such a vague statement and not say, I hold it's D'Rabbanan, is a mudna thing. That's a difficult thing to say. If you're a Tana and you say something like that, we can read in, he means to say it's D'Rabbanan. But if you're an Amoira, you should have said it's D'Rabbanan if you held it was D'Rabbanan. So even if he holds it's D'Rabbanan, there must be some additional chiddush here. So asks the Gemara, my kamash malan, what's your chiddush, Rabbi Yochanan? Kol bracha she'ein ba malchus leishma bracha, that if you don't say malchus, it's not considered a bracha. V'hamer Rabbi Yochanan chada zimna. Rabbi Yochanan said this before. We know Rabbi Yochanan's shita throughout Shas. We mentioned it in brachas. Is if you don't say malchus melech ha'olam in the bracha, it's not considered a bracha. So what's your chiddush here? We're going to give us 2 terutzim. Rabbi Zera is the first answer. It's to teach us, not only do you have to say Malchus one time, which is what we do, by the way, Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech HaOlam, you also have to say it a second time. And Rashi tells us, how do we know he said it a second? Elokeinu Melech HaOlam, Hakel Avinu Malkeinu, we mention it a second time. Now, why would you say it twice? So, Chada Dida, V'chada Debayin Yerushalayim. One is Malchus for Hatoy V'Ametiv, and the other is Malchus for B'nai Yerushalayim. Means you need to say Malchus for B'nai Yerushalayim. You didn't say it in the previous bracha, so you inserted in Hatoy V'Ametiv in order to cover B'nai Yerushalayim's Malchus as well. So the Gemara says, I don't understand. If that's true, you should need 3 Malchuyos. Why? Chada Dida, one for Hatoy V'Ametiv, V'chada de B'nai Yerushalayim, one for the 3rd bracha of B'nai Yerushalayim, V'chada de Birkas Ha'aretz, and the 3rd for the 2nd bracha of Birkas Hamazon. So Elav, the Gemara says, we don't require that. And why is that? Birkas Ha'aretz, my time, why don't we need Elokeinu Melech HaOlam to cover for Birkas Ha'aretz? Mishum dehavila bracha smucha lechaverta, because the 2nd bracha of Birkas Ha'aretz is connected to the 1st bracha, and that has Elokeinu Melech HaOlam. So you don't need to insert another time in the 4th bracha to cover for the 2nd. So B'nai Yerushalayim nami lo tiboy. You shouldn't need to have another one in the 4th bracha for the 3rd. Mishum dehavila bracha smucha lechaverta. It should be as the same and not require Melech HaOlam to cover for B'nai Yerushalayim either, as B'nai Yerushalayim is smucha lechaverta as well. So the Gemara answers, Hu adin, enochinami. The Gemara says, Hu adin da'afilu B'nai Yerushalayim nami lo baya. Really, you're right. L'chayri, you're right to say B'nai Yerushalayim should not require Elokeinu Melech HaOlam in the 4th bracha to include it for the 3rd. Because you could say it's smucha lechaverta. Ela aidi da amar malchus beis David, but since in the 3rd bracha we mentioned malchus beis David, the kingship of David HaMelech, la v'reach ara delay amar malchus shemayim. It would be disrespectful to only mention the kingship of David and not mention the kingship of Hashem. So Memela, in addition, we add Elokeinu Melech HaOlam to cover for B'nai Yerushalayim, even though B'nai Yerushalayim is smucha lechaverta, and you wouldn't have to. So the Rishonim speak out, but if that's true, why didn't we put Elokeinu Melech HaOlam in Bnei Yerushalayim. Why do we wait till the fourth and only insert it then for Bnei Yerushalayim? So Mefarshim say, because then it would create a shavius, it would create an equivalency between David and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So in order to make a distinction, we wait till the fourth bracha to insert it. Nonetheless, we insert it because it's only derech eretz if you mention Malchus Beis David to also mention Hashem's kingship. That's the first answer. Rav Papa Amar, Rav Papa says a second teretz, Hachik Amar, this is what Rabbi Yochanan really means to say. Einachinami. Really, Elokeinu Melech Haolam is mentioned in the fourth bracha so as to make this into a bracha. You also say it a second time to cover for Bnei Yerushalayim. And once you're saying it a second time, you say it a third time for Birkas Haaretz as well. Tzricha Shtei Malchuyos. Rabbi Yochanan meant to say, you say two additional Malchuyos, Lebar Medida, besides for the Malchus of Elokeinu Melech Haolam of Hatoy v'ametiv itself, and Rashi tells us that's actually what we do. We say Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam, one. We say it a second time Hakel Avinu Malkeinu, and then later we say Ro'einu Ro'ei Yisrael HaMelech Hatoy. We say it a third time because it also covers you for Birkas Haaretz. So B'kitzur, just to wrap it up, according to this last answer, we say one time for the fourth bracha. Once you're saying the Malchus Beis David, you want to say it a second time for that. Once you're saying for that also, we don't rely on the Smucha L'Chaverta of the second to the first, and you say it a third time in Hatoy v'ametiv to cover for the second as well. Okay, we'll stop here at the bottom of Mem Tes Amud Beis, Amud Aleph. We'll pick up tomorrow with Mem Tes Amud Beis. Everyone have a wonderful day.